Hello, my name is Manny Strilly, and I'm going to introduce you to what a job analysis is in this webinar. Before we move on, I just want to introduce you to assessment education research experts. Essentially, I'm the only owner. I founded this in 2015. We're located in the DC area, and we have 14 individuals on staff. Of those 14, 5 of them are PhD level psychometricians. We have a lot of experience and expertise. I personally have consulted over 100 organizations. I've done over 150 job analysis, standard settings, and item writing workshops. And one of the things that makes us stand apart is that we are small, and we are proud of being small because it helps us be agile and flexible with our clients. That means that the clients can call us up almost any time of the day, including weekends, and get access to me, and then we try to solve their problems. And flexibility has to do how quickly we want to go and complete your tasks, or how slow, and helping you out, or maybe even being innovative. And when we go innovative, we rely on our senior advisory council, who are made up of a number of psychometricians and industry and outside industry experts. And one of the things that we like to pride ourselves is that we do have accreditation expertise. I am a 17024 assessor for ANSI, and then I do have NCCA experience on both the certificate and the certification side. We have clients who are both ANSI and NCCA currently and in the past, and we guided them through that process. So a little bit about me. I have a PhD in educational psychology that focused on measurement and evaluation, psychometrics. And then before that, I was in a counseling psychology PhD program where I focused on learning various aspects of therapy and becoming a therapist. And in that, I pursued a certification in social therapy and focused on group therapy with the social therapists. I do have an IT certification. Well, I have 2 of them. One is in information security. That's what the GISF is, and I have data management support. I personally have worked at several different organizations around psychometrics, NBME, Prometric, USGBC. At USGBC, I actually was more focused on the product development side of how to put a credential together from start to end, looking at the business aspects and what is a good credential to begin, what's a not so good credential to not even start. And then the organizations I founded were International Credentialing Associates. That was about 8.5 years ago, and we sold that in 2015. And then I founded Assessment Education Research Associates, which has existed since 2015. As you can see, I've been involved in standards. I also have a lot of university teaching experience. I currently teach undergraduate courses at St. Joseph University. And then social responsibility, we really put more of our effort these days at TEDx, and we do their conference experience survey. And then my interests are in pizza making, and I've been to about 10 presidential libraries, and I love friends and family and getting good laughs between all of us in that exchange of hanging out with them. So today I want to focus on what is a job analysis and how does that pertain to psychometric goals, and then we'll talk about what you need to define a job analysis. Well, one thing you do need is understanding a certification program, and then you have to identify tasks and knowledges, and in some cases other characteristics, and then you do a final review of the task and knowledges to make sure that you have everything. So we like to talk about, and believe it or not, I use a slide in almost everything I present these days, the VRF, which is validity, reliability, and fairness. Validity essentially is, are we measuring what we're supposed to measure? So if we're putting together a math exam, we're measuring mathematical concepts. We're not measuring grammar or spelling or anything like that. That would be more on the quote English side of things, but we're focusing on math. And then reliability is really consistency over time. if I take the test tomorrow, will I have the same results? It's also consistency with the items themselves are related to each other, and that's more internal consistency reliability. And then we have reliability that's between raters or judges, and so that's inter-rater reliability. There's other types of reliabilities as well. And then there's fairness, which is really the mecca of all psychometrics. We want to have a fair process to anyone who's taking the test, typically the candidate. And to do that, we tend to ensure that the methods we're using are sound, common, legally defensible for the candidate and the entire world of testing community, and that there's no offensive materials in any of what we do. So there's a few stakes to fairness as well. In the next slide, we talk about the VRF score. So sometimes we evaluate organizations' credentialing programs on their psychometrics, and we sort of look at whether they're accreditation ready, they're meeting testing standards and legal requirements, that they're using evidence-based practices, that we get a group of testing experts in the room, and out of 10 of them will approve the methods and approaches to use. So when we build an exam, we try to get it up to 100, or a credentialing program in itself. So, and the ways we do that is, we already talked about some of this, using evidence-based and common-based methods, that if we going innovative to sort of look at our being agile and flexible, that we can use your suggestions and say, hey, if there were 10 of us in a room, would all 10 of them agree with this innovative approach? And then obviously using common evidence-based or other experts that helps our legal argument. So we're always trying to increase our VRF through these methods or these ways to argument our point. Excuse me. So the job analysis, what is it? So the best way to look at it is, if you look at someone's job and you were divided up into pieces, what are they actually doing, and what do they need to know to do it? What are the capabilities for them to do it at a specific level? And that's exactly what we're doing. These are just units of competency, essentially. And when we typically do it, our method is really to focus on what they need to do and what they need to know. Some groups, they want to look at personality dimensions, so what behaviors they need to do. Some of it's aptitude, what are the necessary things they need to do in terms of having innate abilities. And so there's other sort of characteristics that you could also add. But essentially, these are the two things, and it makes up our exam, so you know what to test on and the areas that we're going to test on. So if you had a math test, the domain and content areas might be algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus. And the way we do this is we get a group of people to help us draft these tasks and review these tasks using different inputs, and they're all SME-based focus groups, and SMEs are subject matter experts. So there's focus groups we might work with, there's interviews, there's surveys. We tend to use focus groups and surveys to identify the task and knowledges. And essentially the steps is that we would ask you to say, hey, can you get at least 2 people who are reasonable and very influential in your field that would come to this task force to draft the initial task and knowledge statements? And they would do this, and then we would put it all together, and we would have the task force review about, we like to have about 12 to 15 people. We typically ask. That's a really good way to assure more representation of the stake of the individuals who will be taking the exam. And we ask this task force to review, revise, add, omit any of the task statements or knowledge statements. And believe it or not, it takes about 2 days to go through that entire process, and it's really good if you can do it in person. It's more rich and things like that. It's more difficult to do it virtually, but it is possible, and we do offer that. And then what we do is we have all these tasks, and we put ratings together of importance and criticality and frequency. Typically, importance or criticality is used, and frequency here and there. So we asked them to rate a task on frequency, like detecting detecting viruses, let's say, and how important is that in your job. And we would ask all the people that you put together, the candidates or certification holders, or equivalent of those across different regions of the world, across practice areas. So we would guide you in that process. And then they would look at it, the task force meeting would look at this pilot survey and give us feedback back. And sometimes we ask other folks to be included in that pilot review. They would say, well, this is missing, or this needs to be added, or this needs to be revised. And so they give us feedback on the survey, even the usability of the survey. We've been doing this so many times. I personally have created 3 different handbooks in 3 different organizations on how to the methodologies around, or best practices around, creating and designing a survey. And we'll get through, we'll help you through that, how to increase your response rates and welcome your communications on your invitation and welcome pages, invitation emails, and things like that. Once we review the pilot survey comments, then we would revise that. The task force would look at that with us, and they would say, okay, this needs to be changed, this doesn't need to be changed. Then it gets sent to your survey participants, and again, that's usually your certification holders, or if it's a new certification, it's those that would represent the certification holders. And then your test specifications is one of the outputs of the survey. So we get together again, looking at analysis of the ratings, the mean ratings and the frequency distribution. 10% said it was not important, and then 90% said it was very important. And we do that by each task and knowledge statement. And then if it's not that important, the survey takers don't think it's important, this test specifications group will look at it and say, well, we'll include this, we'll not include it. It's called a test specifications because it's your exam blueprint, and we'll get into all that. And then once we have that, if you have an existing test specifications, we want to know what's missing from the old one to the new one. So it might be that there's nothing that matches up anymore. So now you have all these items that don't have a place to go in the old one to the new one, the new test specifications. So we have to find out what needs to be added. So before we do anything with your subject matter experts in identifying tasks or knowledges, we have to sort of know what your purpose of the exam is. When it's a new exam, it's maybe not quite defined yet, but we want that ahead of time. So we will work with you ahead of time if it's a brand new exam. If it's not a brand new exam, it tends to already exist in some ways because you have to sell the exam. So you need to have a purpose of, why would I take this exam? What's it going to do for me? And then we also sort of, as part of the purpose, we sort of put an expected competency level of the exam. A lot of times this is sort of known. Sometimes it's not explicitly known. But, is it a novice person? Is it a competent person? Is it a proficient person? My certification's at the novice level of information security, but they have a higher one, that organization. The GSEC would be more on the intermediate level, and then they have a GSE, which is at the highest level. These are like cyber ninjas, or creme of cyber security experts. The other thing we ask is eligibility requirements. It could be professional experience, it could be work experience, it could be education. There's all sorts of things that you could put into eligibility requirements. They could go by years, they could go by hours. So once you sort of have that, it's not necessary to have eligibility requirements, and sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I usually say don't do it because it's just easier for accreditation. Because if you do have, for accreditation, particularly ANSI, they make you check each application. You're supposed to check each application. You have to show evidence for it. Writing tasks. That's what we go through next with the subject matter experts when they're together with us, all 15 of them. And we say, okay, in order to write a task, we don't want to use any weak verbs, we want to use action verbs. Those weak verbs could be understand, assist, prepare. Those are some things that are typically weak verbs. I actually consider identify a weak verb for most professional certifications. I think there's a higher verb that you can go up to. But that's a whole different argument. But here's what you need to do. What are you going to do? And then to what or whom. So in this case, it's detect viruses essentially, and you could put all adjectives before this, like the development of life-threatening diseases or viruses. So detect viruses or diseases. And then how do you do that? In that case, you do it through DNA sequencing. If that's accurate, I made this up. So the methods or tools could do that. You could add that as well. In many cases, it's just this and this, and sometimes the tools are just in examples as EGs. There's another way to do this, and this really occurs if you have different levels that you're trying to do. Sometimes we do job analysis where we have to create a job analysis for 3 different levels or 2 different levels, which is the novice, the intermediate, or the expert. And the way we control that is we already talked about the behavior. So this is your action, verb, summarized notes of the observed patient behavior. We also talked about who this exam is for. That's usually in your purpose. So to get it to those different levels, you could change the conditions. Maybe for a novice, the conditions would be, in arid climates. Maybe for an expert, it might be in all climates, for instance. And then the degree, you could change it. Well, they need to detect a virus 7 out of 10 times if they were a novice individual. But if they were competent or a higher competency level, like expert, they would have to do it 10 out of 10 times. So that's how you could change that there in terms of writing tasks. And that's why I love using this example, but it's the ABCD method if you're interested, and there's a reference below. And it was part of my dissertation on how to write tasks or learning objectives. So when we look at knowledges, they could be a number of things, and I usually bring this up to subject matter experts. If you have a task, it needs to be supported by at least a knowledge statement. So you could have a task that says detect viruses, but what do you need to know to detect viruses? Well, you need to know some certain methods, practices, maybe types, structures, all these sort of things fall into it. Maybe some theories, technologies, policies, laws. You get into a lot of laws and regulations with and codes with construction and finance. So that tends to happen actually a lot in their knowledge statements. So when we get to this, again, anytime we're working on tasks, when we have a task list, we're revising, we're adding, we're omitting, and then we're looking at the order of the tasks. A lot of times the order sometimes is sequential. And then same thing with knowledges. Once we have the knowledges, then we make sure that each task has a knowledge that's linked to it. So we'll have the list of tasks, and then we say what knowledge statements can be linked to it. And we just need a few of them just to say that we are supporting. There's a linkage here, and it adds the validity of the job analysis. So again, these are the steps that we do after the task force meeting, which are in black, and then we talked you through this earlier. And then the outcomes of a job analysis is a list of task and knowledge statements that you've all created across domains. And then we have the mean, the standard deviation, and then your frequency. We could add other sort of things, and sometimes we actually might do calculate density and have a mean and then another mean by like a practice area. So it could be that this is a physicist in a hospital, and this could be a physicist in a research center somewhere. So then we could go across different regions too with the means and things like that to do a cross analysis. The other outcome you would get is by domain. You remember when I talked about the mathematical examples, but this is the PMP from PMI. This is the real one that's out there right now. If you want to take the exam, you actually know where you probably would have to study more on executing. You might, if you really want to study really overnight and you don't want to focus on one thing, you could not focus on closing if you did it all in the last minute. But it tells you where all the questions would be. And the ones I usually have percentage of questions and number of items, and then in a column here. So I know how many items are on the exam. Typically, we recommend 100 items to get reliability, to guarantee reliability to be in a good place, as well as ensuring that the content is going to be covered in an exam. But you could reduce your number of items required for the exam down to 75 or even 50. You have to look at what your reliability is going to be at that point. And if you have really good item writers, you could go lower, because they usually do that. And if the content is also stable too. The other thing is you might want to add what we call unscored items, pre-test items, trial items, or tryout items. These are items that don't count towards the score of the examination for the candidate. So sometimes you hear, well, there's 100 items there's a total of 115 items. 15 of them will not be scored. So those 15 don't count towards their grade, essentially, or the final score of how they're going to be passed or failed on. So that's something to consider. We tend to do, our typical thing is 100 items with 15 pre-test items. But we could go higher and we could go lower than that. It's always easier to go higher in terms of guaranteeing reliability, but all that also requires more effort and costs more money typically. So I want to thank you for listening to this webinar. Hopefully you get a sense of how we do job analyses. Our job analyses, I didn't mention this, derive from an ETS methodology, and Mark Raymond and Mike Rosenfeld's sort of their legacies in the field in credentialing and job analysis, and written a lot of information on it, as well as Michael Kane. So all three of them, two of them are ATS researchers and one's a former ACT researcher. So we derive from their techniques. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, just feel free to reach out to me.